You. Yeah, you. Are you tired of your Twixtor looking like trash?
No, no, no.
Is it looking like this? Well, I'm here to help. Alright, so let's start this tutorial. I have a Weathering with You clip, one of my favorite from the movie. It's a beautiful clip. She's sitting here, you know, praying, has the light shining down on her, hair's going, everything, right? So let's go ahead and let's go through how I would normally do my Twixtor. So the first thing you want to do is you want to cut out any dead frames. So what I mean by dead frames is basically I'm going to move frame by frame on the clip. There's one frame, so there's movement, right? So I'm going to cut there, right? And then see there's no movement, so we're watching the hair. The key is whatever the subject that you want to slow down, you want to like ramp up the speed, you want to watch them, right, for their movement. So we're not going to look, the reason I chose this example, we're not going to look at this blade of grass. We're not going to try to twix the blade of grass. It's irrelevant, right? We're going to try to twix her moving, right? So she's not moving in all these frames. This is what I would consider a dead frame, right? So we're going to keep moving. There's a frame, right? Boom, we cut that. Cut that, right? Cut that. You guys get the the whole scenario. It's not hard. You just get every single time you see a new frame, you just cut. You split the clip, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'll probably speed this up.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Jeez.
All right. So now that I have all of the cuts on the clip where there are new frames of movement for it, right? What I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna go ahead and select from the bottom, from the first cut we did, and I'm gonna select from the top, right? So the reason I'm doing this is, you'll see in a second and I'll explain, is we're gonna go ahead and get this marker, we're gonna grab the end of this clip and we're gonna pull to the left. That's gonna shorten all of them. Since we just selected all of them, let's short them to one frame. So see how there's now the dead frames are missing where they would be. So, and the reason why you select from the bottom to the top is for right here. So you'd be like, I know some people they're like, you know, I do time remap keyframing, you know, when I'm doing Twixtor. And honestly, I've done both, and time remapping is way slower than this. If you can just get some cuts, get a shortcut, right? So your split key, right? And then get another button to have for you to move frame by frame and just cut the clip. This method's way faster than moving keyframe, trying to move them over, right? Because this is, I'll show you why, is you cut them, right, like I did. You're gonna go ahead and right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers. And you're gonna click OK. And then boom, all of the frames, it just cuts up those gaps and removes them. So all the frames are now in order, right? So let me go ahead and show you what would happen if you didn't select from the bottom to the top. So I'm going to Control Z. So now we have all those dead spaces left, right? So if I was to select from the top to the bottom, whoops, I hit Control instead. Top to the bottom, right? Select all of them. Shift A you could do too. And I was to right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, and do that, we would get them way over here, sequenced from the first layer that you grab downward. So we don't want that, obviously. We want them to be back where we need them to be. So I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to reselect it from the bottom, shift click to the top, and then we're going to go ahead and keyframe assistant, sequence layers. And I've done, like I said, I've done the keyframe method. I do cutting method. Cutting method is way faster, 100% faster. Just put shortcuts on your keyboard or your mouse to cut and move the frames one by one, and you'll have no issue at all. So once we're there, we have all of our frames cut up. We're gonna go ahead and right click, and we're gonna pre-compose. And now this is getting into not so much how everybody does it, but how I do it personally. I like to flow frame all of my Twixtor clips, or cut up clips, I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do is, I do have a version of this rendered out already, but I'm going to go into how I do my flow frames real quick so I can show you guys. I'm sure there's tons of tutorials on this too, but it's super simple. Like I said, I'm going to play the clip. You can see there's no dead frames at all. I'm going to make sure before we render it out. and we're gonna go to a plugin I have called Anubis. I'm just gonna call it Weathering with You, because you know it's weathering with you. And I'm gonna tell where to go, and I'm gonna render it out in here. And it'll take a second. It's gonna pull up the file explorer right here. You can see the clip. Boom, right? Awesome. And what we're gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna open up my Flowframes, and I do have the paid version of Flowframes, which you'll see why it's kind of important for me to have it in a second. And I'm going to be using for the interpolation AI, I'm going to be using Vulkan Vapor Synth and the implementation of Rife. So for the input video, we're going to go ahead and find that trim clip that I have right here. You can see all of my Flowframe stuff, Weathering with You. Right, we're going to find that. And then we're going to go ahead and tell it where to go, which is going to be Weathering with You. Right, and then normally most people would have this, right? So they would have ×2. You can interpolate the footage. So what this is doing, Flowframes is doing, is it's taking the frames that you're giving it, right? And it's looking at the 2 frames in between it and seeing where there's space in between to make some type of movement. And what I'm doing currently right now for the output FPS is I'm telling it how many frames I want you to try to make between the frames I gave you, right? So currently, since the clip is in 23.976, if I would do ×2, it would make double the frames in between. So it's looking at double frames in between the frames I'm giving it. Now, this is important because with the bot version of Flowframes, I can go ahead with this interpolation AI, I can go ×41, and that's the max you can go is 1,000. If I wanted to be precise, I can make it 1,000, but I don't really see a difference in that at this much frame rate. And the reason, be like, you know, Fangs, why are you doing this much frame rate? Well, I want you to think about this real quick. Whenever you, like I said, you have 2 frames, right? And with Twixtor, what happens whenever you have too much movement in between clips, right? It warps, right? So the more frames you have in between the original frames you're giving it, the less likely it is to warp. I've had clips, and I don't have an example right now, but I'll just give you, I'll verbally give it to you, is I've had a clip, right? It was a Jujutsu Kaisen clip, and I rendered it out in Flowframes, the trim clip, as I believe it was a ×10. Yeah, so ×10 and then a ×41, right? And I tried to Twixtor both clips. Both clips, and the ×10 one was warping, and the ×41 one was not warping, because I made frames in between, enough frames that Twixtor had enough to go off of, that it would not warp. And that's why this is important. And like, you know, that's way too much. It's not too much. It's not. I'm giving Twixtor what it needs. In real life, you don't have missing movement from your scenes. In real life, there's constant movement. And that's what Twixtor's based off of. It's not made for anime. So this is what we're doing. And I'm going to do 1,000 FPS. And I'll tell you, you can go output MP4. The reason I go MOV is because obviously I'm getting 1,000 FPS file, right? So with MOV, it's a lot better for the encoder and After Effects to read it compared to MP4, which is very highly compressed. I have a lot of space on my computer. I have 16 terabytes. This is going to render out to about 1 gig. It'll be fine. I'm not worried about it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and render this out, and I'll just put some elevator music, and hopefully this will just go. Usually it only takes about a minute. I have a 3080, so I'll be back in a second. Alright, so it looks like it took about 41 seconds. We're done here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into with After Effects, right? So you can see this is our original trim clip. I'm going to go in, and I'm going to go to my Flowframe clips. I'm going to find Weathering with You. And then I already did this earlier as a test, but here's the new one currently. My bad, old. This is the new one. And I'm going to import it, and what you're going to see is it is currently, you can see the frame rate. I actually have 2 of them from the earlier, but you can see the current frame rate, 983, right? So that's what this clip is. And now you'd be like, composition settings, let's look. So the current composition I'm in is 23.976, right? And this is where this FPS is going to change with Twixtor. Where this, I'm going to go ahead and I'll hide this. We'll hide the original clip, right? And I'm going to go ahead and pre-comp this. Now, the reason it's very important to pre-comp your clip, right, is for this following reason. It's going to grab the frame rate off the actual clip. So right now, in the main comp, we're in 23.976. When I go into the Flowframe clip comps, right, the comp right here, look at the frame rate. And now watch what happens when my computer tries to play this. Look at the interpolated frames. It's trying to render them right now. Let's see if I swipe. Very, very smooth. And it's obviously 1,000 frames for my computer. It's going to struggle a little bit. That's why I do MOV, like I said, because MP4 is a lot harder to render. 1,000 frames. Look at the interpolation. All those frames it's rendering at a time. So you can see very smooth from what's rendered here. Very smooth. So that's why also this is a great example why it matters. Look how I'm dragging the cursor. There's 1,000 frames here. Look how nicely it's not warping at all, except for the grass. But remember, we're not worried about the grass. What we're worried about is her. So we're gonna go back to the clip. I have it pre-comp. I'm gonna enable time remapping. We're gonna go ahead and put my Twixtor preset on it, right? And I'll go ahead and I will make sure I zoom in over here when I'm editing, when it pops up, hopefully. And you can see one of the main things you want to remember with Twixtor is whatever your main comp is that you're editing is needs to be the FPS, right? So older versions of Twixtor do not have this in FPS to out FPS option, but if you have this version of Twixtor, make sure this is checkmarked. It'll just do it for you. If you don't have it in the input frame rate, make sure you put whatever comp, FPS you're editing with, right? And then all this stuff I have on, and then frame interpolation, I do motion weighted blend with forward, right? And that's it. I don't touch, there's no reason to touch the speed because it's adding Twixtor, right? Regardless. So we're just going to keep this window up like this. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is now with the Twixtor here, you don't want to go ahead and try to time remap it while it's sitting here. You want to go ahead, pre-comp it. Again, we're going to enable time remapping again. And then we're going to go ahead and find the last frame. Right? So we see how it's starting to get stiff. It's no more movements. We're going to go ahead. It should be around here. I'm moving frame by frame here. See, there's two same frames. That's the last frame. We're going to go ahead and make a keyframe on that. We're going to go a frame forward. We're going to cut it. We're going to delete it, right? And now, technically, I'm going to go ahead and work area this. This clip looks no different than the original clip, right? Now, what you're going to see with After Effects is this is where the flow frame is going to come in. I'm going to slap this graph on it currently with flow, and you're going to see the interpolation. I'm going to go ahead and render this. You can already see it. Look, no warps at all. It's beautiful. Look at that. And we'll try a couple different graphs just to show you the extent of this. And obviously your graphs differentiate based off of how you're editing your audio or what style you're going for or whatever. But we're going to put this current graph on this. And you'll see it's going to slow down to the end. And you're not going to have like any warps. There's a little warp on the hair. A tiny bit. But you can see it's very smooth, very seamless. And it's very easy to do. You saw that. As long as you have a decent enough computer, you can do this. It's not hard. And it's just a matter of getting it down. And that's all it is. So I'll try one more graph just to kind of show you how really smooth it is. We'll go ahead and go like this. So it's it's going to start slow and ramp up. And that way you can really see how smooth this part is right here. Go watch it. See. And it's all now. It's very important if you were to get warps from this, right? Something you can do is you can go ahead, find an area that it warps, right? See if we can find any type of warpage here at all. See, I don't know if we're gonna find it. There's a tiny bit right here, right? And what you could do bit because we're going to find the last area that it didn't warp in. We're going ahead and then going to move the time remap. Actually, we're going to go ahead. No, we're going to go ahead and delete that. We're going to put more of a regular graph on this first. Yeah. And you can just take, what I'm going to have you do is you just change the graph based off of where the warp is. So if you were to have a warp in the beginning of the clip, you could just speed it up and the warp would be barely noticeable. It's a little hard to explain considering the fact that the whole point of my flow, like my Twixtor and Flowframes, is to have literally no warps. I don't want any. So it's kind of hard for me to show. But, I mean, if you don't have any, you don't have to worry about it. But if you do, you can graph around it, is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah.